everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is former Congressman Garret Graves. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
You bet.
We are in day 24 of the government shutdown, and seemingly there is no end in sight right now. Today, many federal workers will not be getting their first full paycheck, and they are bearing the brunt of this shutdown. So to start off the conversation, because we are barreling towards potentially the longest shutdown in history, what do you make of the moment we're in right now?
Look, I think you bring up a good point that you have a lot of victims of a shutdown that don't have any responsibility for causing it. And that's noteworthy. And I think that people need to be aware of that. I mean, here we are in a shutdown that was totally man-made, that was fabricated. You have folks that are being asked to vote for an appropriations bill that they negotiated and established the levels of appropriations or funding, and they voted for it 13 times. And in this case, they're voting against it. It doesn't make sense. And I'll say it again, Brittany, we're in a totally manufactured crisis, but there's some victims, and the case of employees, federal employees that are essential, that are still working, that are going to be penalized for the politics of the moment.
I want to talk about exactly where each side is, because for the past 24 days, there has been limited to zero movement on the sides. I mean, they're pretty deadlocked. I've never seen this in all the years I've covered politics. Usually I try to find areas of bipartisanship, and I'm not seeing that in my conversations with Democrats or Republicans. Republicans argue that, hey, we're the ones voting to keep the government open here. You voted for this CR before, and you're not voting for it again. You're jamming in some policies. And some have said that they're open to negotiating healthcare subsidies, but only after the government's open. Democrats, on the other hand, say that they don't trust Republicans to negotiate in good faith, and that healthcare is too big of a deal to let go in this moment. Polls show Americans blame everyone, but multiple polls are showing that Republicans and Trump are getting more of the blame right now. Who do you think's winning this messaging war?
Look, this one is unique, and you hit the nail on the head that this one it feels different, but it is different. And you talked about a few reasons why, but look, let me bring up another one. President Trump came in saying that government was too big, that we had too much of a federal bureaucracy, that it was too slow in operating. There were too many programs. And I think that a 3-week plus shutdown that's occurring, where 99.9% of the American people aren't feeling an impact. They aren't seeing the impact. And I do want to double, tap on the fact that you did mention federal employees that are working and not getting paid. And that's important to make note of. But the average American is not experiencing an impact. And so that almost goes to prove the point that President Trump has made. The federal government is too big. There are too many programs. And if we can go 3 weeks, and if the average American doesn't experience any type of impact, that proves that we do need to trim back on the amount of federal programs and federal spending that we have today. You're aware that we just crossed over $38 trillion in national debt, and it's an unsustainable direction where we're headed right now. Now, if I can make one more point, Brittany, on the healthcare issue. Look, the healthcare issue, in terms of the subsidies going up, it's accurate. But let's go back and just peel this onion back just a tad. You cannot both, out of one side of your mouth, say that Obamacare is a great program and it's been successful in improving access and affordability to healthcare, and on the other hand, go out and say you need to expand and extend a second level subsidy, an extra subsidy, to make Obamacare premiums affordable. You can't say both things. That is absolutely inconsistent. And I think that's a really important point that needs to be made.
And I want to get to the people who are impacted, the people that are feeling these impacts. I want to get to the people who aren't feeling those impacts too, because I think that's an important part of this conversation. But let's stick to the healthcare subsidies, because Speaker Mike Johnson, he was asked about if Republicans have a plan to address the Obamacare subsidies. And he said, yes, we do have proposals. We could have that ready immediately. Do you know or have any insight of what those plans or proposals are?
Look, I think that what they're putting together is something that would, on a temporary basis, prevent some of these high premium increases. But I will tell you that I don't see any scenario where Speaker Johnson would would extend these subsidies in perpetuity, because I think where his head is, and some of the actions you've seen out of President Trump in the White House, is how do we actually reduce healthcare costs overall? You've seen the president go out and negotiate with drug companies. One of the most egregious and biggest problems in healthcare is these absurd prices of prescription drugs, absurd and in many cases completely unknown. It's Russian roulette when you go to the pharmacy. And so I think that it's twofold. One is, yes, they will come in and offer some type of temporary extension or temporary second subsidy, a continuation of this COVID subsidy. But at the same time, I think be more aggressive in tackling healthcare costs to bring them down to where you don't need a second subsidy.
And do you think Republicans right now are losing on this issue? Because your former colleague, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, she said that this is the number one issue she hears about when she goes to her district. She says she just doesn't want to stick to the talking points here when my own adult children can hardly afford health insurance premiums. And she thinks that Republicans need to latch onto this issue for the midterms and just in general to help Americans. I mean, where do you think Republicans could be better when it comes to healthcare? Because healthcare affects everyone across the aisle. I mean, you go to the doctor, like you said, sometimes it does feel like Russian roulette. People, a lot of Americans are one health disaster away from being bankrupt.
Yeah. Look, I can't say it enough. Healthcare in the United States is a disastrous program. We spend substantially more than any other country in the world per person on healthcare, and our healthcare outcomes are not justifying those obscene costs that we see. For example, I believe in the United States, we spend around $15,000 per person. The next closest country in terms of per person spending is somewhere around $9,000 or $9,500, and their healthcare outcomes are better than ours are in many cases. So you can't justify what's going on. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is right in that healthcare costs do need to be addressed. But I'm going to go back and say what I said earlier. Obamacare is actually the problem. It has not achieved its goals of improving affordability and access. People's healthcare premiums have gone up, health insurance premiums have gone up, but their deductibles have gone up as well. And so, I mean, this is a really crazy direction where we're going. I mentioned the out of sync cost of healthcare per person in the United States. So I think that to address what Speaker Mike Johnson's talking about, to address what Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about, you've got to address the underlying problems with the healthcare system in the United States, design a system that actually makes it look like you intended to build it that way, as opposed to this bolt-on after bolt-on opaque process that we have today that's completely unaffordable and doesn't deliver the healthcare outcomes that we deserve here in America.
And I think you bring up a really good point of the only place I'm seeing agreement right now from Republicans and Democrats that they're saying healthcare isn't perfect in this country and we need to fix it. Now, it seems like the timing on when those negotiations will happen, I mean, that's the big point of contention. Obviously, Democrats think it should be before the CR is passed. Republicans think it should be after. I mean, what do you think it's going to take to either find an off-ramp or get out of here? Because like you said, and I'm taking out the people who aren't getting their paychecks, and we can talk about them in a little because I think that's very important. A lot of people are not feeling the impact of this shutdown yet. I'm sure your social media feed could be similar to mine in the sense of we follow a lot of politics. We get news inundated constantly. I've been talking about the shutdown for weeks now. That's really my major conversations. I was at a party a few weeks ago when the shutdown was happening. I was the only media member here. I also was the only person who's even remotely covering politics at all. And there were about half of the people there that didn't even know the government was shut down, and they had taken flights to get to this party. I mean, my mouth was on the floor. I was trying not to be rude. I was shocked because this is my whole world. But really, a lot of Americans are not even aware that this is happening. Do you think it's going to take regular Americans to feel this squeeze for people to get to the negotiating table here?
Yeah, look, I'm going to go back and say that you just laid out a perfect anecdote for why this proves President Trump's point that the government's too big. You know, if the average American doesn't even know that we're shut down, it's indicative that, my gosh, we have too many people working in the federal government. It shouldn't be an employment office. We have too many federal programs out there. Let's figure out which ones matter and are important, and let's fix them. And of course, Brittany, healthcare is one of them. That one matters and it is important. I don't think you're going to get to the point where between now and the end of the year, you are going to fundamentally fix the problems with healthcare? Can you put temporary fixes in place to make it more tolerable, to make it put it in a place where we can move forward and continue negotiating? Yes, but what I think is huge, and you made this point, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alex Ocasio-Cortez that are out there both saying healthcare is a problem. I mean, that is absolutely remarkable. And that is one of those places where, my gosh, if you have these polar opposite folks saying that they agree that there is a problem, let's capitalize on that moment and figure out how to fix it. But I want to say one last thing. You cannot keep going out there saying that we just need to add subsidies. That's not a solution. All it does is it just makes additional government spending, and in this case, maybe $1.5 trillion in additional spending, just continuing to subsidize a program that's not working. So I do think it's important that you address the foundational problem and that there's a commitment to do that long term.
And to your point, I mean, when you see both sides, the opposite spectrum here, agreeing on an issue, I think that means that there's a lot of consensus that this issue does need to be fixed. Now, obviously, the ways to fix it will be discussed, will be debated, will be hashed out. But do you see an off-ramp, or what do you think that off-ramp is going to be? Or when will we see that off-ramp, rather? Because it doesn't seem like any party wants to see like they're bending the knee, that they're the weaker party. And I understand how politics are at work here, but at the same time, people aren't getting paid. The optics of federal workers who are furloughed aren't getting their paycheck. They're in food bank lines right now. I mean, when are we going to see an off-ramp?
You made a point earlier that, what is it going to take to kind of change the mindset of Republicans, Democrats, both to kind of force them to engage. And I do think that public sentiment is going to have an impact. I don't think that there is either side that is having a massive victory or a massive loss right now in regard to what's going on. I don't at all. And so I think if that changes, if you start having more public impacts that are more widespread, I think that you will see both sides feel more motivation to come to the table. If I had to take a guess, Brittany, I'd say that sometime around the second week in November is when you will likely see a little bit of movement and folks start coming together and having discussions. And I'll say it again, I don't think that those discussions are going to result in a permanent extension of this second temporary subsidy that was put in place in 2021. I think that you'll see a shorter term extension with a commitment to address some of the fundamentals in healthcare that make the United States the most expensive healthcare market in the world.
And what do you think, if any, negotiations happening with your former colleagues? I mean, what do you think those really look like? And if you think that could be a potential off-ramp, why can't it just happen now?
So each side is trying to work and inflict as much political pain as possible. And Brittany, look, it's unfortunate that in the United States that our political system has become so polarized and divisive that every day isn't necessarily every member of Congress, which is supposed to be our board of directors for the greatest country in the world, that they're not thinking, how can I advance America? How can I advance my state, my district, our nation's priorities? And instead, many of them are thinking, how can I make the other political party look bad? How can I inflict damage on the other side? And it's really unfortunate that we've devolved into this situation. But the reason that folks aren't talking right now is because they don't feel the political pressure to do so. They believe that this is an opportunity for them to inflict political pain on the other side, and they're trying to exploit this opportunity. But I'll say it again. It is disgusting. No one took an oath to a political party. Folks took an oath to the Constitution, to the people they represent. And I think that what you're seeing right now is a failure of politicians that is inflicting pain on folks that don't deserve it.
And I'm curious what you make of Speaker Mike Johnson's leadership. He is from Louisiana, just like you are. He's standing his ground. He's saying that, hey, Republicans did what we had to do in the House, at least, to keep the government open. What do you make of his leadership in this moment?
Look, I think it's important to keep in mind that Speaker Johnson rallied the votes to pass an appropriations bill that opens government. He did his job. That's what he was charged to do. And it is Chuck Schumer, because the rules in the Senate are different. It is Chuck Schumer that is holding Democrats at bay, although you have had a number of Democrats that have voted for the appropriations bill to keep it open. But in this case, he is telling them, despite the fact that they voted 13 times on the same exact appropriation levels, he's telling them to vote no, because he's trying to use this as a political moment. So Mike Johnson's done what he needed to do. He has delivered the votes, delivered the appropriations bill to open government, and it's Chuck Schumer that's not. But last thing I'll say is that I don't think that Speaker Johnson is going to get out of sync with the White House. I think that, they're going to largely try and stay in sync on what they're doing, but I don't think that the onus is on Mike Johnson to act right now, with the exception of they're going to have to change the date on the appropriations bill that they passed, because, as you know, they did a temporary spending or a temporary appropriations bill, and we'll be approaching that date that they funded government through soon. So they're going to need to extend the date out a little bit further this year.
And obviously, depending what party you're in, this is either called the Schumer shutdown, the Trump shutdown, Republican shutdown, Democrat shutdown. It depends who owns it, depending on your party. But I am curious, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, he said before that in order, he thinks, for any serious negotiations to happen, President Trump needs to be a part of them. Do you think that too? And what would you like to see from President Trump?
Look, I know that in politics, folks rarely like to go back and look at the facts and figure out what's really going on. But I view it as being disingenuous that Senator Schumer is blaming this on anyone other than himself, whenever it's the same exact appropriations levels that he and others have voted on 13 times. And the secret is that the appropriations levels that they're voting on are actually based upon a negotiation that President Biden, that Senator Schumer, and that Nancy Pelosi negotiated. So they are basically refusing to take yes for an answer. And I think that's an important distinction that needs to be highlighted. In regard to President Trump's involvement in negotiations, at some point he'll have to be involved in negotiations in order for government to be open, because President Trump will have to sign the appropriations measure into law. But I mean, I understand President Trump's position. He's saying, I'm trying to have them agree to the same thing they've agreed to over and over again, the same appropriations levels that they've negotiated. And shutting down the government just proves that the impacts are not widespread. The average American, as you indicated, doesn't even know government shutdown, and certainly are not seeing big impacts. And so let's figure out where there are impacts, and that gives guidance to Russ Vought at the Office of Management and Budget. It gives advice or guidance to the president on which programs actually need to be resumed and which ones haven't caused any impact on the United States, and said another way, are a complete waste of taxpayer dollars.
And to that point, although a lot of Americans haven't seen the impacts soon, they could start seeing them if the government is still shut down in a few weeks. I'm thinking of the biggest travel days are coming up with Thanksgiving, the holidays. ACA open enrollment begins November 1st. SNAP benefits could stop next month. But I do want to get back to those furloughed workers, or the workers who are working right now and not getting paid. A lot of them today, they missed their first full paycheck. And I'm curious what you think the optics are of them in food lines, while members of Congress, they're the only ones who have the power to end this shutdown. They're still getting paychecks. Also, too, another part of this conversation that has been brought up, too, has been criticized, is the East Wing right now of the White House is being demolished to have a ballroom, and then that contrasted with people in Washington not getting paid. I mean, what do you make of those optics?
Well, first, I will tell you, when I served in Congress, anytime we were in a government shutdown, I sent a letter to the comptroller of the House and said, "Don't pay me. I don't deserve to be paid if you have folks that are in the federal workforce that aren't being paid." And I think that is an appropriate response for members of Congress, and I think especially for those that are voting no and blocking the resumption or the opening of the federal government. I think that that air traffic controllers and others, those people that are working, they don't deserve to be penalized for politicians' failures, or for they don't deserve to be used as a political pawn for those that are choosing to not allow the government to be opened. And I think that's important. I think those people should be paid if they're reporting to work. Folks like the military, air traffic control, TSA, and others, some of these essential workers, they should be paid. And I can't say it enough. If politicians have caused this, they don't deserve to be paid. If you have essential federal workers that are out there because their job is integral to the operations of the United States, they need to be paid. And I think that the White House has taken some measures to ensure our military is being paid. I think that additional efforts should be made to pay some of these other folks that that are being forced to go work and are not being paid. Lastly, in regard to the White House, look, I don't have, that's a distraction. The fact that you're doing a construction project that is privately funded, I don't think that it's anything that folks need to be talking about, unless you want to go out there and harp on the fact that you're concerned that a historical building has been knocked down. I don't have any problem with it. These are private dollars. It's not taxpayer funds. As far as I'm concerned, it's a distraction. And what we need to be doing is focused on getting the government operating again on a trajectory that's going to begin eliminating this $38 trillion unsustainable debt that our country has reached.
Well, Congressman, I appreciate the conversation today, because it seems like we're still gridlocked. It seems like there's no end in sight. But as we get developments, I hope you can come back on and break them down with me. Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Brittany. Enjoyed it.